Hi everyone, my name is Sarah. I am a current head consultant at our Center for Writing and Public Discourse. And on behalf of all of the seniors, we would like to thank you so much for being willing to be a part of this panel where you'll just answer a few of the questions that we've had submitted by seniors about senior thesis and be able to kind of help us out in that regard. Yeah, before we get started into the questions that our seniors had, maybe we can just start with very brief introductions. If you all could say your names, your titles, and the office or department that you're representing today.
Sure, I guess I'll go first. My name is Deborah Flynn. I'm in the Office of the Registrar, and I am the Associate Registrar for Records and Registration.
Hi everyone, I'm Sean Royalazo. I'm the Assistant Dean of Students for Academic Success, and I'm in DOS.
I'm Kirsten Hansen. I'm one of the teaching and outreach librarians over at the Claremont College's library.
And I'm Christine Crockett. I direct the Center for Writing and Public Discourse, and I'm also in the FWS program here.
Hi, I'm Professor Koch, and I teach in the government department. My specialty is international relations.
Hi, I'm Cameron Shelton. I'm a professor in Robert Day School. My specialty is political economy.
Hi, I'm Lars Schmitz, Associate Professor in Biology in the Keck Science Department. My specialty is the evolution of morphology.
Great, thank you all. So we'll just hop right into the question. So our first one is, what does a realistic schedule for this lengthy writing process look like?
We include a recommended schedule in the senior thesis syllabus. So the majority of your questions in terms of the lengthy process can be found there. We've got a schedule that says the bibliography should be completed by week 3. You should have an outline by week 4. The literature review should be done by week 7. Statement of methodology by week 9. Your first full draft should be done by week 11, and then your second full draft by week 12.
Thank you. And where can seniors find the senior thesis syllabus?
It's on the senior thesis website. So if you go to the CMC website and just in the search box, you can type in senior thesis and it will take you to the page.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, how much of a 2-semester thesis needs to be completed by the end of the first semester?
And again, this information is also in the progress page of the syllabus. But the students writing a 2-semester thesis should expect to be graded for the work completed at the end of the first semester. It's the student's responsibility to find out exactly what the reader wants, turned in at the midpoint of each semester, as well as at the end of the first semester. So basically, you should work with your thesis reader to find out what the expectations are. Expectations for the product to be completed by mid-year will differ depending on the credit value of the thesis.
Our next question is a little bit more general, and it's, how long should my thesis be, and do I have to sign up for a thesis seminar?
So I'll say that for me, the answer to that question is ask your reader. Your reader will know. And I see nods and thumbs up here. And as you've heard all of us say so far in our answers to these questions, I hope we keep talking about your reader. And so I hope you're all getting the solid impression that you are not writing a thesis by yourself. You're not supposed to magically know how to do all these things. This is work to do in collaboration with your reader, who will guide you.
I would say these are department specific. The idea of whether you have to sign up for a seminar, right? I think we just heard about in the sciences. So at least in economics, in the Robert Day School, it is required for honors, but not required of everybody. It is, however, highly recommended for anybody. And I know that there are particular readers who require it if you want to write with them. And so in RDS, this is Econ 180. Is the designation of the class. And it's a class where one of our professors will just move you through some of these stages and disseminate a lot of information that's sort of common to all theses. And you get to see what other people are doing and learn by observing your peers as well. So it's a very useful class.
As for the length of a thesis, I think it's great advice to always be in touch with your reader. I always tell my thesis students, it has to be as long as it needs to be, but not longer. So essentially, you need to explain the problem that you're investigating. And you need to lay it out for a non-specialist with scientific background, but it really, really varies with the topic. And it should be concise to the point, but you need to provide enough information. And the thesis, from my perspective, and this is science-centered, of course, is that your job would be to explain the problem to others and make it accessible to not necessarily a specialist, someone with a scientific background, of course, but make it accessible. And you don't have to be super wordy to do that. Get to the point, lay out the problem, make it crystal clear what you're analyzing and what you found. And that's a good guideline. But again, ask your reader. It's very important to be in touch with your reader.
If I could jump back in at this point, I would say length in terms of pages is not the metric that I, as a reader, look at, right? And so this is why, you know, the recommendation of ask your reader. I guess there's often a lot of invisible work, right? That it's not exactly clear. For instance, in my field, there's a lot of work to gather, analyze, and put together data sets. And sometimes it's quick for some theses, and sometimes it's longer. But the thing that I wanted to really hit on here is, I think every student underestimates the process after the first draft. So after you've completed a draft, I think I speak for all readers when I say that there's still a lot of work left to be done. And I think so students are so centered on that first draft that they often, you know, put it off and get it done like, you know, 3 days before the due date. And I think what I would say is do your best to get that first draft done much earlier. Hopefully your thesis writer or a reader is helping you set earlier deadlines and so on and so forth. But I would say that a lot of the work is not simply in the length, right? It's in a lot of the revision, it's in a lot of the polishing, it's in a lot of other things that aren't obvious. So don't fixate and focus on length. Make sure you have a good conversation with your reader about all of these different processes and what's expected.
How specific should a thesis topic be, and do you have any tips for selecting the topic?
Okay, so I was asked to consider this question, which is a fantastic start question. A senior thesis topic should be really specific. So a thesis seems like an enormous amount of writing, and it is a lot, but it's still not big enough for you to be able to write about a broad topic in an interesting way. And you want to come up with analysis, findings, conclusions that are your own. So the topic has to be specific enough to allow you room both to demonstrate that you understand the topic and to allow you to contribute your own thoughts and to give it your own personal touch. So coming up with a topic is a good start, but you need to narrow it down to a question or hypotheses or an argument or maybe a thematic focus. Because if you can narrow it down, say to a question or two, that actually then directs you in how to write the thesis. Then everything you do, the books and the articles you read, the notes you take, the chapter outline that you draft, the actual writing of the chapters, everything you do then will be in service of answering the question. So it really directs your focus and your writing so that now you're conducting an inquiry, you're investigating something. And if you're not doing something in service of answering the questions, don't do it. And that helps focus your work.
Thank you. Our next question is more specific to STEM, and it's just if there are any thesis requirements that are specific to STEM fields.
I'm happy to take this question. So in the sciences, we have two different categories of theses. We have a 1 semester and a 2 semester research thesis, which both involves coming up with the original research question, independent research, and a lot of experimentation and interpreting your results. And so typically the 1 semester thesis, you could do that in your fall or spring semester of your senior year. For this 2 semester version, you could do, of course, fall and spring together, but you could also do a summer and fall thesis. So we do the research over the summer and then essentially try to complete all experiments throughout the summer and then write up your your results and the analyses in the fall semester. This particular version is very popular among students, but to do this, you really have to get started early in contacting professors during your junior year, which is really important because slots are limited in terms of research assistantships over the summer. And also, as Cameron and Lisa were saying earlier, you need to come up with a good question before you start planning your research over the summer. And so you need to bounce off ideas with professors way ahead of time. So it's pretty much in your junior year where you lay the foundation of a successful research thesis that begins in the summer. That's just really one important thing. And I encourage everyone, knock on professor's door, be it the Zoom door or the real door, and ask questions. Come up with ideas. If you find something interesting, just ask them about it, and then you can have a better handle of identifying that question that you want to analyze and you want to write your thesis on. No matter what thesis type you will end up doing, all our thesis students are required to attend a departmental seminar where we invite speakers, specialists in their area. They're sometimes from the region, sometimes they're from across the country. So they're delivering cutting edge, very interesting summaries of their research, which is really helpful not only for you to maybe identify a question, but also it displays to you how you should tackle your project. It's just very helpful, and it is required. You have to attend 6 of these seminars throughout each semester that you're enrolled as a thesis student. So in summary, I think just go talk to professors very early. And if you need more information, the Keck Science Department has a website with quite a bit of information there, which is a good starting point.
And our next question is, how do I get started on my research?
So I can take this one because whereas the Center for Writing and Public Discourse does writing, the library does research. We're two sides of the same coin. So in terms of getting started with research, I think it's really helpful to think about how comfortable you are with the library resources in general, as well as the resources in your field. So if you don't know the major journals in your field, if you don't know the major databases in your field, if maybe you haven't really had a library session since your first year, now is a really good time to brush up on some of those skills. So the library has 3 recently updated tutorials. So we have a Start Your Research tutorial, which is the basics of the research process and sort of the basics of using our website. We have Exploring Academic Integrity. So to go back to Chrissy's point about clearly distinguishing between your ideas and other folks' ideas, you can use the Academic Integrity tutorial for that. And we also have a brand new literature review tutorial that walks you through how to keep track of sources as you find them, how to cite them as you write, and some general organization tips, especially for long-term research projects like this. I would also strongly encourage you to talk to your faculty members about major databases, about major journals that they know of. They are experts in their fields, and so they can give you guidance on where you should be looking, sort of the major thinkers and the major sources in your field. And of course, connect with your subject librarian often and early. If you don't know who your subject librarian is, you can go to Contact a Librarian on the library's webpage, which is library.claremont.edu. And all of our librarians are listed by subject there. We're all friendly, we're all helpful. So even if you don't necessarily need to meet with us right now about your senior thesis, go ahead and just drop an email to your subject librarian, introduce yourself, say, this is my topic, do you have any suggestions? And we can also meet with you for things like figuring out where you should search, brainstorming keywords, thinking about some aspects of organization in terms of organizing what to look for first, things like that. So those are my tips on getting started with your research.
So our next question is, how can I improve the quality of my writing or make sure it's suitable for my readers?
I can go ahead and take that one. It's a really good question. I think my first answer is pretty obvious. Visit the CWPD. We're available online, as you all know by now. So make some appointments with our consultants at any stage of the writing, and you can get that feedback that you need to really tailor your thesis in a manner that will be both accessible and understandable for a general reader as well as for your advisor and for yourself. See our website. The WP website is soon going to be updated with some really helpful infographics that I think are worth reviewing. I'd say that this is a really good time, early this first semester to think about three major areas. Your purpose, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Maybe write down some notes about that. Your audience, who are you writing to? And the conventions for this kind of research project in your chosen discipline. And that's the kind of information you should get from your faculty advisor. In terms of things that are fairly universal, really for all writers, I'd say organization really matters, right? So I find that to be a challenge for myself and for most of the writers that come into the center. This is so true, especially of a long-term project that you're all undertaking. I would say think ahead about how you would organize your ideas. You may remember back to when we introduced you to the access model for paragraph development way back in your first year. This is still relevant for a long-term project. So you can apply that way of organizing your ideas on a macro level. So if you think about it, your global assertion is really your driving answer to your question, your thesis question, the one you're asking and then responding to in your thesis project. And each chapter can be broken down so it will have its own assertion that relates to your larger thesis argument, right? Each chapter is going to have its own evidence and your explanation of that evidence organized roughly according to the access model and sort of woven and interspersed throughout. All of this is going to be addressing both that local assertion you're trying to make in that chapter as well as that bigger argument that you're supporting with every single chapter. And hopefully every chapter you have will have some significance behind it. So the so what, like why is this chapter important in order to support your perspective on whatever it is that you're researching. So I think organizing your ideas, thinking up a plan to organize your ideas, and then maybe relying on the access model can help. I'd recommend to ask yourself if a general reader will understand what you're trying to say. Because if a general reader will understand what you're saying, then you know that your argument is sound, you know that the language you are using is appropriate, is easy to comprehend by a reader. If you're using discipline-centric terminology, things that are typically used within your discipline, you might consider briefly defining those terms for a general reader. This also, frankly, ensures that you actually understand the terms. So it is a moment where your advisor can say, oh yeah, you got this idea down, or oh no, you need to do some work on this. So thinking about what terms you have to define. And I think, maybe thinking about not assuming that your reader understands your points or how you're interpreting the evidence. Let them see your mind at work. Make sure you're explaining how you come to your conclusions. I think as a writer, that's one of the most effective things we can do in producing our ideas. Track your outside sources really carefully. Make sure you're distinguishing between your ideas and outside sources. Definitely find a technique that works for you. And I think too, I would say this to all writers, but for a long-term project, you need those last maybe couple of weeks just to revise. So give yourself those last 2 weeks at least, if not longer, to revise. So I think those are some tips that could help at this stage.
What are some best practices and strategies for seniors who wish to communicate effectively with their advisors?
I can start by saying, check your emails. Read your emails. All of them, but especially those from your faculty advisor. Am I right? Yes. Okay.
And that's great advice. If you can ask your reader when their office hours are, and just put that in your calendar. If you don't have a conflict during that time, just attend those regularly, as regularly as you can is one great way. And if you can't attend office hours, of course, then try to set up meetings. But you know that that's a time that you should always be able to see your advisor if you're free then. And I would also say when you do meet with your reader, remind them what you're working on in the thesis. Just remind them what your research question is and remind them where you are in the process of writing the thesis, because your reader probably has several students and that'll help start the conversation more quickly.
Those are good ideas. I think some students that I've had have I think quite effectively said, I'm going to email you every Monday with what I have done over the past week. And it was both a method of accountability and a method of making sure that that they got feedback, right? That I was in the loop as to what they were doing, and so if they were going down a route that probably wasn't going to be productive, I could help them stay on track.
I like those ideas. One thing I would like to add is that it always helps to be very intentional about the meetings that you have. Have specific goals for each of your meetings. We have a little limited face time in this pandemic right now, and so if you have that face time, if you have a meeting, write down the things that you want to accomplish during a meeting. And I think that will help you to focus on the meeting and that you get the necessary outcomes that you need for to be on track with your thesis. So be intentional. I think that's very important.
I should add that of the various resources we'll have available on the CWPD's website, one of these items will be an infographic helping you be intentional in your meetings with faculty members. And so be on the lookout for that resource on our website soon. It will help you keep track of these kinds of notes that Lars is reminding us are so important for directing your conversations with faculty.
And I just also wanted to add, like, utilizing the library resources and finding strength in researching or honing that strength of being able to research is the definition of working smarter, not harder. Because I've worked with a lot of students who probably haven't had as much research experience as we would have liked by the time they reached their senior thesis. And they spend hours trying to find a single article. And then they realize, oh, I could visit a librarian. And then it takes them like 10 minutes. So really, really want to emphasize that.
Yeah, meet with us sooner rather than later. I don't know of many people who've ever regretted that.
Okay, so we can go ahead to our next question. Which tips do you all have for seniors writing in a virtual setting this semester?
I can go first on that. So many of you are also aware of our success consultant program that we have. Obviously there are a lot of resources, peer resources that are available at CWPD, also at the library. But particularly for success consultants, just obviously with the stress that many of you all are facing due to the pandemic and this transition to learning virtually, success consultants can be really helpful in you, particularly when it comes to organizing your time. So they aren't necessarily the ones who will map out like a writing schedule in the same way that consultants at the CWPD would do, but they are helpful in at least like blocking out your time, what that looks like. I think some seniors at this point might also be looking for jobs beyond CMC, so that's taking up a lot of time. And I think as far as working with a peer and kind of laying it all out, like this is what needs to be done in this time period, they're helpful in parsing out what works, what your work style is like, and taking advantage and optimizing that. They're also really helpful with like figuring out how to create a workspace with what is realistic and what, if you're at home or elsewhere, what that like new home atmosphere will look like in incorporating writing and particularly an intensive project into that. So they're just really good for, consulting because of their title.
And then I'll just go ahead and jump in and add to that. I think the best tip is for you to stay in contact with your readers, especially in a setting like this. It's easy to get off track. If we were on campus, you'd be able to schedule stuff at the Ath or maybe have lunch with them in Collins. But with the absence of that, the best tip I can give you is to stay in contact with them, schedule Zoom meetings with them, email them constantly. As Sean said, as you're working with your peers or individually on your paper, make sure you're checking in with your reader. Have them read small pieces of it to make sure you're on track, because you don't want to do a lot of work and then submit something to them and you have to kind of start all over again. So just make sure that you're in constant contact with them. To ensure that the work that you're doing is sufficient and it allows you to make progress to completing your thesis. And the registrar's office is also available if you have any questions, if you get confused on some of the policies or procedures or where you should actually be in writing your paper. So you can reach out to us as well.
I did also want to echo what Deborah said. I think for a lot of students, this might be the first time you're like partnering with a faculty member on a project. And so in the same way that like they might give deadlines, I might also have to take initiative and be like, okay, so be upfront with your work style, be upfront with what you need. Because, the level of how hands-on a faculty member is, or your reader will be, is it varies. So I think what's helpful is learning how they operate, understanding how you operate, sharing that, and figuring out how you can be successful in meeting deadlines.
So if I may break in with one more tip, and this is sort of a less a people tip and more a technology tip, but I think this semester in particular, you need to figure out how you're backing everything up. Especially because you're away from the technology support of the college. So I strongly suggest, if you are not using a citation manager already, get yourself hooked up with Zotero. The library has great instructions for it. If you haven't figured out how you're going to be backing up your actual writing process, whether that's that you're writing it in the cloud or you back up every single time to something like Box if you're writing in Microsoft Word, if you're doing interviews, if you're doing lab research, something like that, figuring out how you're backing up your data, which is something the library can also help with, is absolutely essential, because you're sort of stuck this semester, right? You are further away geographically from the supports of campus. And so in some ways, you're going to have to do a little bit of your own tech support. And backing up, because your computer will always die at the least opportune moment.
Okay, well, everybody has shared a tip. I'm going to share one too, but it's not only for our virtual lives now. It is for just our lives in real life, and it is break down this project into manageable chunks. It actually can be broken down into manageable chunks. I really love what Sean had to say about checking in with your peers, helping them get your brain around how to just tackle different parts of this project. The CBD consultants can help you with that. The website on the register site for senior thesis can help you manage that. It sounds like our library also has some areas where you can get some of this work done and just breaking down this project into manageable chunks. And it is much more achievable that way, instead of you're looking at it as this huge giant thing that's sort of looming over you. It's really like writing one paper for one class at a time. This is like a class you're taking, and you're writing several papers for it.
Great. Thank you. Our next question is if you have any suggestions for seniors seeking guidance regarding disciplinary conventions for their theses.
So I think, as always, there are two really important things to keep in mind. One is start early, and two is consult with faculty. Right. So, but I mean, I can broaden it a little bit more than that. But just to say, one of the classic mistakes that I get is students come in a week or two into the semester and they still have, what Professor Koch mentioned, they still have a very broad topic. Right. And so if you start early, you will learn the disciplinary conventions. And as you try to narrow along the lines that Professor Koch was mentioning, you will narrow in a direction that's useful and that's productive. So, for instance, in economics, we have this complicated dance. You have to do an empirical thesis and you have to somehow figure out how to make it an interesting question that you can actually find data on. Right. And so doing that particular dance, which I think is quite particular to econ, is something that a professor can help you with. So start early, start the semester prior to when you want to write your thesis, start thinking about these things, bounce ideas off a couple of different faculty. They'll help you, think about other things to look at. The other thing that I would say is, presumably in your upper division electives, you've been reading papers, reading books, reading professional work, which is, of course, of a deeper and higher quality than you're going to be able to produce in a one semester undergraduate thesis. But it should be a model, and it should give you a sense of what the disciplinary conventions are, no matter what field you're writing in. And so pay attention to those. Go back and read some of the ones that really were interesting to you and think about the structure. And that'll give you some sense of what you're trying to emulate. And it also can be a good source of questions, right? One of the things that I commonly suggest to my students is what I call replication plus, which is go and grab something that was of deep interest to you in one of these upper division electives and think about, well, maybe I can replicate this. And then, as I was reading it, there was this wrinkle that they chose not to pursue that I thought would be interesting. So anyway, but to answer the question, the main issue with understanding disciplinary conventions is start early, give yourself time, look at past material that you've had in your upper division courses, and bounce ideas off professors.
Our next question is, what tips do you have for seniors regarding time management, especially given the size of the project?
One great resource for seniors is the CWPD. We have a lot of students booking appointments on a weekly basis or every couple weeks if they want to use that as a resource to stay accountable and to check in with somebody throughout the writing process. So we highly recommend going to the CWPD and booking as many appointments as you need.
I'll jump in again and say, I think in this regard, it's useful to, like Odysseus, you want to tie yourself to the mast. You want to have a commitment device. And your reader can serve as that commitment device. But, I think some professors explicitly lay out a schedule and say, you must check in with me, at X, Y, and Z times. But I think a lot of them are actually going to let you guide that. And so in some ways, what you might do at the beginning of the process is say, I need this commitment. Can we set up a bi-weekly meeting? Or something like that. Ask for deadlines, and then signal to your reader that having the reader enforce those deadlines is really going to be helpful for you. So again, I think in some ways you need to choose your level of commitment and take charge in that regard.
One thing I ask my students to do is to create their own writing calendar, and you can do this with a Google spreadsheet or a Google Doc. But I have students write out every week of the semester. Every week is a row if you're doing this in a spreadsheet. And then you decide what you want to achieve when, and you work backwards. So if you're doing a one semester thesis, you find out when is my thesis due, you write that down. And then you say, okay, so what does the week before that need to look like? What do I have to have finished? And in that case, the answer is everything. But you need to then, you can work backward and say, okay, so all I really want to have left in the final week before the thesis is due is I'm just polishing and I'm rereading and I'm making sure my bibliography is finished because I don't think I'll have it done yet. Fine. And then you say, well, how about the week before that? What will I need to have finished by then so that I can be in the right place? And you just work backwards until today. And then you have a list for yourself of tasks. And so when you sit down at your computer, you're not saying, I have to write my thesis today. I don't know how to do that. I don't think I can write my thesis today, right? It takes the overwhelm out of it. Instead, you have tasks. Okay, this week, I have to find the books and articles I need for this chapter of my thesis. And I need to read them and start putting notes in an outline. Okay, that sounds like something I could do. And so if you can break down the tasks of the thesis into, if you can think of your thesis as a series of papers, potentially, maybe each chapter is a paper. You know how to write a paper. You've done that before. It takes a lot of the mystery out of it. And then you can see each week, these are the things I need to do. And then you can celebrate the accomplishments that week. When you've done those things, you can say, I didn't write the thesis this week, but I accomplished the tasks I was supposed to I set out for myself. And that's a really great feeling that helps motivate you to continue your work.
I very much like that approach. The thesis can always seem a little daunting and overwhelming. It's a big project, and it helps to break it down in small little goals that you can check off. That feels good when you complete something, at least as a draft version. And of course, a draft doesn't mean it's done yet. It does need a lot of revising. In a way, one piece of advice I try to offer students is to really treat the thesis work as a real class where you put, let's say, about 10 hours per week towards that thesis. If you do that consistently over the entire semester, you will get a lot of work done. Every week, 10 hours of research, experimentation, writing, reading, discussing with your professor. If you do that consistently, I think the consistency is really key to getting it done. And I think there's nothing worse than the exponential increase in workload over the last couple of weeks, because that stresses out not just you, the student, but also the professor and everyone else involved. And the end product may not be as good as you just put in consistent work on a weekly basis. I think that is very helpful for many.
I could jump in and add something else that might be useful to our thesis writers, and it is, we've talked a little bit about your faculty advisor holding you accountable and sort of holding your feet to the fire, so to speak, or helping you tie yourself to the proverbial mast. I think that your friends, your peers, can do some of that work and actually potentially be more effective at it. And And I think especially now that we're all functioning virtually, it's so important for us to think about and for you all to think about building a community of fellow creators and writers that you're surrounded with, and that can help motivate you and help you celebrate those milestones, little as they may be, right? Those are important things to do. And so I suppose I would invite you to think about, who do you want in your thesis writing pod? That's like a popular term right now, but who do you want in that select group of folks who you're going to go to for maybe some feedback or maybe some encouragement to just stick with whatever you've got on your agenda for a given week. Those of us who write, in our various fields, we have these communities. We've spent a large part of our lifetimes building up those communities. It's an important part of how we get our work done. And these communities exist across the globe in some cases, and yet we connect with those folks and we help keep each other accountable. Your thesis is a time where you get to flex those muscles too. It's not just about the writing and research, but also the apparatus that helps you produce something meaningful, and that involves trusted peers.
Thank you. Okay, so our next question is, what kinds of support will CMC be offering to seniors writing their thesis this fall? So you might think about tech support, writing community, information, and also just the unprecedented stress of the time period.
I can take the beginning of that. I think, just tech support in general for this semester. If any sort of issues come up or you're, working on your research and writing and you realize, oh, I really need this as part of my progression in this project, email DOS. So just dos@cmc.edu. Shayla Chalker is our administrative assistant who's really overseeing that process. So she'll be able to get you connected to what you need. As far as community initiatives that we're hoping to have for thesis support, many of you are aware of Thesis Surge. I think we're in our 4th year of Thesis Surge. We're doing another virtual one as we did in the spring. There might be 2, particularly for the fall, because although the thesis deadline has only moved a week up in the semester, when you think of the semester calendar, in the calendar year, it's like 2 weeks before. So I think some seniors who were rising juniors just a few months ago kind of felt like, oh, thesis is due in December. And it's like, it's not, it's due at the end of November and you won't have Thanksgiving break to work on your thesis. So we wanted to provide more opportunities for students to prioritize that, spend a Saturday just hammering out research, pages, etc.
So I can speak to library resources. I think something that a lot of people don't realize is that even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the majority of our library resources were online, and that hasn't changed. You can still access all of our ebooks, all of our journals, all the stuff that was online while you were on campus is still there for you. In terms of accessing things that aren't digital, I encourage you to visit the library's COVID-19 resources page, because that's where we have the most up-to-date information. But we are scanning items for students that aren't digital but that we have in our print collection, so we'll scan it and send you a PDF. And we also are doing limited mailing of books. So if there's an essential book for your topic that's not available as an ebook, we can't get it for you digitally, we will actually mail it to you. This is where thinking ahead is really helpful because, of course, it has to go through the US mail. It does take time to scan things, but the library is really committed to making sure you have all the things that you need for your senior thesis.
And maybe I can jump in and just give you all a preview what the Center for Writing Public Discourse may be doing. By now, many of you have filled out the survey that we circulated in response to which we're creating this video. But in that survey, it seems to us that many of you are looking for either large communities, such as those provided by senior thesis search events, or even smaller opportunities to work closely with other writers to sort of keep each other accountable and to make progress together and feel surrounded by communities of other writers and creators. And so the Center for Writing will be hosting some events that will respond to those needs that you've articulated in that survey. It might look like pairing some of you up to be writing partners. It might look like hosting regular senior thesis retreats. And so we're working on that. And in fact, Sarah and the rest of our head consultants and some of our consultants are helping the center make sure that we can respond to that. So be on the lookout in your emails for notifications regarding those events.
Thank you all. Our final question is, How will we celebrate seniors who complete this milestone in their CMC career without being physically together?
So that's something our office is working on. We're with any sort of in-person celebration or event, we really focus on like what the value was in that in-person event. I think particularly with thesis party that exists after students submit, particularly in the fall for this semester. I can't speak for the spring because I think things are TBD for there. But I think we're hoping that some sort of item will be in your hand. Don't think it's going to be a bottle of champagne, but I think it will be something that will bring almost the same amount of joy. So we're still working on that, but I appreciate you for asking that question.